I think the point is, I'm not here to convince you that natural wine is what you should be drinking. There is a big market out there of people who are drinking natural wine and who do not need convincing. I think the takeaway for me from what the amazing work that the producers are doing, even if there might be a little bit of a microbiological problem in this particular wine, we have a duty of working in the long term. We are in an industry where even if you just look at the farming aspect, let alone, what happens in the cellar. But, for me, what's really important is that we are respectful of the environment. We're ethical. We try and work by reducing, obviously, carbon footprint. We work on carbon sequestration, and that has a public.
Official media partner, the Italian Wine Podcast, is delighted to present a series of interviews and highlights from the 2024 Wine to Wine Business Forum. Bringing together some of the most influential voices in the sector, we discuss the hottest topics facing the industry today. Don't forget to tune in every Thursday at 3 p.m. or visit ItalianWinePodcast.com for more information.
Today we have a very unique opportunity with Isabelle Legeron. She's a master of wine, but I like to call her the queen bee of natural wine. And Robert Joseph, he is truly the wine warrior. And
is it warrior or warrior?
Yeah, warrior. Both. You worry me. You've been worrying me the past couple of days. Okay, so I think this will be also an interesting conversation. Whether you are pro-natural wine or against natural wine, it doesn't matter. I want you to understand how Isabelle, her approach to tasting, the behind the scenes of natural wine. Okay, you guys take it away.
Thank you. And can I just kick this off before handing over to Isabelle by saying, I've been on a journey, as people say. I had some really, really bad experiences with natural wine 10, 15 years ago. I also had some really bad experiences with some sommeliers and other people who told me the wine that I wasn't enjoying was what wine was and should be, and the sort of wines that I thought I liked from Burgundy and elsewhere, including organic and biodynamic, were not what wine is. And there are indeed still some restaurants in Copenhagen and elsewhere where if you're not natural, you're not on the list. However, and this is the important thing to say, I think two things. One is the quality and the reliability of natural wine has changed hugely over the period. I taste far fewer wines with what I consider faults, and Isabelle and I will talk about faults one way or the other because it's part of the story, if you like. But I've been far more happier to order and drink natural wine in the last 5 years than I was in the previous time. And secondly, and I think this is an important thing to say, is whether or not any of us want to make or drink or sell natural wine, I think that as happened with Nouvelle Cuisine in the 1970s, long time before most of you were born, what the arrival of Nouvelle Cuisine in France was a new way of cooking that didn't involve as much flour and butter and cream as traditional French cooking did. And there was a lot of fun poked at Nouvelle Cuisine cooking at the time because very often there wasn't very much on the plate and so on and so forth. Nouvelle Cuisine was brilliant for food. So many French chefs said, I don't have to use so much flour. I can do this without cream. I can do this without butter. And I think that natural wine, whatever we think of it in general, so many producers are now using less sulfur dioxide. They're thinking about whether to fine or not. They're thinking about filtering. All sorts of thought processes have been kicked off by the natural wine movement. So I'm going to put that on the table to start with. And I'm now going to hand over to Isabelle, who is, as Stevie's just said, the queen bee.
Okay, well, look, thank you for spending these next few minutes with us. I've picked 3 wines that I thought would be an interesting, conversation sort of topic. I wanted to maybe discuss some elements of the wines. They are all 100% organic or biodynamic and made completely without any sulfites throughout the winemaking process. Like I said, I've chosen wines because they all have a very strong identity for certain reasons. And I just wanted to have a chat with you. I haven't chosen necessarily the easiest flight. And as Robert mentioned, brings the food on the table. For me, context is really important, which is why I don't really spend a lot of time with competitions anymore, or because I think removing wines from the culture where they're from or from the context in which they're meant to be enjoyed is difficult. So let's
Can I just, before we start tasting, just a quick question?
yes.
Just to raise, if I come to your raw wine fairs, of which you're doing 8 around the world, there are going to be wines, and they are for natural wines. There are wines there that have got some SO2. So these wines have 0 SO2, but for you, in terms of the baseline, can you just, before we kick off, to define what a natural wine is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so in the context of the fair, we have on our books, I would say, about 2,500 growers, and of which any given year we have 600-700 growers who will take part in one of our events. You know, we do them in Japan, Germany, France, Copenhagen, and so on. But from the very beginning, I was clear that I wanted to have growers who are completely natural, so who add 0 sulfites, but also growers who add up to 50 parts per million during the winemaking process, who have a total on analysis of 50 ppm. To give you some context, organic legislation allows up to 150 ppm for white wine and 100 milligram per liter for red wine total. For me, a natural wine is basically a wine that is alive. It's a wine that has been allowed to let the microbiology exist throughout the farming and the winemaking process. So I talk about 0 sulfites added up to 20, 30 parts per million. For me, I still consider that as a wine that has microbiology, even up to 50 parts per million. So at the fair, people who want to show their wines cannot have more than 50 ppm total sulfites.
It has to be organic.
So it has to be organic or biodynamic, certified or not certified. It has to be fermented naturally on their own yeast population spontaneously.
And hand-picked?
Yes, hand harvested, and then some fining, but we declare what it is, and that's it.
And no filtering?
Some filtering, but no sterile filtration.
Okay. And in terms of equipment, do you have any restrictions on equipment?
No, I mean, we say, obviously no reverse osmosis, no harsh treatment, no heat treatment, and so on. So, so as long as the wine is basically, the microbiology from the vineyard is carried through the wine, and then I taste all the wines. So we have a lot of people who want to come to the fairs, and then I taste all the wines.
So the reason I just wanted to ask, I think natural wine is not what a lot of people think it is. I think a lot of people think it's absolutely 0 sulfur. It's absolutely, I think it's, as you're saying, it's to do with the life in the wine more than not doing this or not doing that. There is some pragmatism in your way of looking at it.
Yes, for me, as long as the wine is alive and it is a translation of the terroir, but also the most important is the farming. I mean, you cannot make a natural wine if you have dead vines or if there's no communication between the vine and, the soil. So the farming is extremely important.
So these 3 wines you chose.
Yep, so I picked those 3 wines. They are growers who would come, to a fair. And then just to give you some context, when I receive samples, so when people want to come to a fair, they have to know somebody in the community who can vouch for the vineyard. And then they have to fill in a questionnaire, give us analysis, and then I taste the wines. And the way I taste wine now is, what's important for me is I tell the story. If it's just made on a large scale, these are not temperature controlled at all. So the fermentation, can be between 25 and 30 degrees. Is the wine telling me a story? Can I taste that there is work going on in the vineyard? Is there texture, complexity? Maybe sometimes it's a bit imperfect, and to me that's okay. It's a togetherness. It's the vineyard and then what's going on in the cellar.
Now, would you like us to taste all 3 and then
No, I think it's just one. I think
one at a time?
Or we can, we can taste. I can give you a little bit of background on each wine as we taste them.
Shall we do it blind to start with and see what people think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So here we are, we're in Austria. We're in the latest vintage, so we're in 2023 in Burgenland. So we have a fairly elegant, I would say, light vintage. The wine is 10.5% alcohol. We have a third of the grapes were macerated for 10 days and then blended with 2/3 with no skin contact and all in oak. So fermentation in very large barrels and then the maturation in used oak.
So Isabelle, did this wine remain on its lees for a long time? Was there a lot of lees contact?
There is a little bit of lees, yes.
Because that's to me one of the things I find in good natural wine. If you're not using SO2, the lees can be a very useful way of keeping the wine fresh.
Yeah, and similarly, interesting, this winery uses the same recipe to make all their wines. So basically, whether it's a white, a rosé, or a red, they do, a certain percentage of direct pressing, even on the red wines, and then a small percentage of skin contact. So all the wines are actually really, I would say, elegant and light. I think the skin contact has been a tool, used, in recent years, because when you do skin contact, you extract really useful antioxidants, you extract oils, it acts as a preservative. So I think skin contact is a very useful tool in the natural, in the natural winemaking process. And in a way, it makes sense because, a lot of the goodness is in the skin, and sometimes the stem, and this is just skin. So the idea is also to use, I think, some skin contact to help with preservation because you don't use sulfites. And, this is a journey. I mean, they started in 2007. It's a Gruner, Veltliner, and Welsh Riesling blend. They're fully biodynamic, Demeter certified. And for them, it's been a journey. And I think that's what's really important. You don't start making natural wine from one day to another day. It's a really lengthy process that involves meticulous work in the vineyard, which is why organic viticulture or biodynamic permaculture, regenerative, the latest sort of maybe buzzword. But I think that's what's really important is the more you work in the vineyard, the easier it gets to make wine like this, because the grape has to be full of life. It's got to be really resistant. It's got to be really robust in order to be able to withstand high temperature in terms of fermentation, but also the oxidation process during the fermentation process, and then go back to something like this. And these wines, I've been tasting them for years, and they really age beautifully.
So can I ask in the room, we've got a microphone here. Can I have some comments from the room, some tasters?
I think it's delicious. I love the texture above everything. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about texture in natural wine, how important that is? And I always think texture is everything in a natural wine. And really, it's far more important than the fruit. And I see that in this wine.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. To be honest, I think texture is important in all wines. I think the problem is we've become so focused on, aromatics that we've really forgotten about the way it feels in the palate. And what I love about natural wine, particularly, given there's no fining, there's no filtering, you have that lovely grip. I mean, obviously it's going to come from a little bit of skin contact, a third of it. But still, there is that tension, there is that texture in the wine. And a lot of, I would say, well-made natural wine that reflect an idea of the terroir will have that texture. And I think that's really important. And for me, I taste for texture. So when I taste, I'm actually not really that worried about the aromatics. I barely write them down. But what I want is when I taste the wine is I want it to be all over my palate. I want that sensation of detail everywhere. I don't want to feel the oak. I want to feel the fruit tannin or the fruit texture from the skin in this case. But I want the wine to be everywhere, and I think that's actually really quite rare. Very often you taste wine and there's that donut, or it's short, or it doesn't really give you any sensation or any pleasure. And for me, it's really about that concentration and that detail of aromatics in the palate, including the texture.
I think it's a very nice example. You've got that limey character, that sort of Gruner, and I don't know what the percentage is of Gruner, Welsh Riesling.
I don't know.
But all I know is I think it's a very well put together wine, and the acidity which is there, I think, is very much married into the wine. It's giving it a lovely freshness that I think is very impressive. I agree with you, by the way, entirely about we think very often too much about the way things smell and less about the richness in the palate and on the finish.
And this is really young. So it's their latest vintage just being released. It's still very much on the primary, sort of more towards all that greenery, green notes, lime, and so on, and very mineral. It's 10.5%. Like I said, it was harvested because the grapes were ripe. They do the harvest by hand at night at 3 o'clock in the morning, so that when the grapes come in, there's no start of the fermentation until much later. And these wines from experience really evolve beautifully. You can leave them open in the bottle for a long time. And this has got amazing longevity and freshness and purity. But like I said, when they first started making that, completely sulfite-free wines, it was touch and go, and it's been an adventure that's been going on for a long time, because you can't overnight decide, okay, I'm going to start making sulfite-free wines, which is why for me natural wine is, of course, sulfites are important part of the story, but it's about the farming. You have to have impeccable farming, and obviously you have to have impeccable winemaking in the winery. You don't have any tools, you don't use sulfites, you don't have any tools. If there is any issues, you have to make sure that whatever you harvest is impeccable quality. So that it's very, very tough, and you have to do a very tough selection in the vineyard. But everything happens in the vineyard, and once you have your vines, which communicates with the soil and gets all the nutrients, and then you are able to get amazing quality in your grapes, then you can do something like this.
So let's move on to
number two.
Number two, which I think the colour is possibly telling us something before we start.
Yeah, so here, slightly more, divisive. There is VA there. So it'd be interesting to discuss that. But we are at 5 days maceration. It's not actually a super extended skin contact. We're in Slovenia, in the karst limestone plateau. 5 days skin contact. We're in 2020, which is also the current release. So the wine undergoes, like I said, 5 days skin contact just on the skins, no stem, in oak, and then stays in an oak barrel for 3 years until it's bottled and released, onto the market. So what they do is they are very conscious of making sure that the wine is fully stable before it's released, which I think is, we talked about some faults, and sometimes you see a lot of wines with maybe mousiness, like a slight instability, and I think often it's because the wine is released, too soon. The thing is, when you work naturally, you do need a lot of time for the microbiology to do its work and for the wine to.
But can I ask you, if I've got a wine, if you're looking in terms of conventional, if I've got a wine with VA, my biggest worry is that the VA gets worse. And if I haven't filtered it, if I've got it in a bottle with a closure which isn't absolute, potentially I'm going to get more VA in 6 months or a year. And that's the question of how much sulfur you're adding to prevent that. If we've got a wine with no sulfur dioxide and we have this level of VA now, how confident are you that will remain at that level over the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, or should we be drinking it now?
No, I think from experience of tasting this producer over the course of many years, other producers who bottle with VA, which is on the high side from a conventional perspective. For me, the VA has always under control and not really got that that much worse. I think the thing to say about this for me, so on the palate, I actually find the VA, there's a little bit of residual sugar left in the wine, but I think it's 2 or 3 grams. The VA is 0.7. Actually, so it's not that high. For me, it's in balance with the wine. So when you taste the wine, I think initially on the nose you get the VA, but on the palate, I think the wine is really well integrated. I think there's enough concentration, there's enough going on in the wine to sort of like absorb and make the VA more of a complexing agent than anything that takes away, personally. And I think when you're in the context of also eating, this is a brilliant wine to do food pairing, because it's it's complex. It requires to sit down. It requires to just eat with it. It's not necessarily a wine to have, although I'd be very happy to have it as an apéro somewhere, but it's it's a wine that requires a little bit of food to go with it. And it's Witkowska. And the reason I picked Witkowska is, and yes, okay, there is, the VA can be considered a little bit on the high side. Personally, I think it works. It's because we see a lot of skin contact. And I think people have gone crazy with orange wine because, it's new, it sells. In the natural wine environment, it's a great tool because it means that you can actually, compensate the fact that you're not using sulfites. But, it's very tricky for me anyway, when I taste a very good orange wine, it's actually not that often, because we also have the tendency to pick when it's not really ripe because we're worried about alcohol levels. So you've got this kind of like problem of wanting to use the skins, but you don't want to pick when it's too ripe because you don't want the alcohol. You want the freshness because everything is about crunch. Everything is about light body, light alcohol, these days. And I think it's important not to be too scared of alcohol. But I think Witkowska works really well as a macerated wine. And here, even though you do have this slight VA, there's no note of cognac or caramel or, which are notes that you get so often in skin contacts. I think when it's done for too long or the grapes are not quite the best material. Whereas here, I think you get the nice tension, the nice anise, and the texture from the skin is interesting.
It's interestingly lifted on the finish. I think that comes partly from the VA, obviously, but it's a very interesting in terms of, if you think about it in food matching or anything else you're doing, it really does have that brightness there. Quick question. In terms of natural wine making, one of the things that has struck me on occasion is there are people who are making wines like this, not this one, who are putting it into a clear glass bottle, and often with a cork, not necessarily always the best cork. To me, if you're not using sulfur dioxide, doesn't it make sense to really err on the side of dark glass, and whether it's screw caps or DM, but a closure that is going to keep your wine protected from oxygen?
I mean, clear glass is a great topic. I don't think it's actually a topic for the natural wine world. We should never be using clear glass to bottle wine. I mean, I know it's Instagrammable, it looks beautiful, but you don't use recycling glass to make clear glass. So, this is one of my big battle at the moment, with a lot of the growers I work with. But the argument is, if you bottle it under clear glass, unfortunately, you're likely to sell 10 times as many bottles as you are if you're under green glass. So that is something for all of you out there to start educating the public that we must stop using clear glass, because it's what sells. But, who wants to drink a rosé in a dark bottle? I get it, but, the payoff, the consequence of that action is actually huge, plus the cost of the clear glass, plus the shortage of clear glass. But anyway, look, I think it's a bit of a misconception to say that natural wine is a lot more fragile than conventional wine. Wine made without sulfites travels really well. Yes, you have to be a little bit more careful along the way, but to be honest, if you're in the fine wine business, you have to take a little bit of care onto, how bottles are shipped. I do events this year. I'm about to fly to New York in 2 days, but, we did an event in Japan. We're in Toronto, Montreal, the bottles are shipped. I've never really had a bad experience. So I think, but that's what's really amazing about natural wine is that, it's alive. There is a life there, and talk about food, and it's all about kombucha and all that stuff. And that's what's beautiful about natural wine is it's alive. So it is really resistant. When you say that this wine, the first one was fermented at 30 degrees, like in modern winemaking, everybody's trying to keep the fermentation, temperature super low to keep the aromatic, the crispness of the wine. There's nothing non-aromatic or uncrisp about this wine. But because there's so much going on, in the juice, so much diversity of different bacteria and different yeast that they have, they can defend themselves. It's just like, I think we underestimate the ability of these wines to...
I think looking at time, we're going to move on to the third one while we're here.
Yeah, sure. So the third one is probably going to be another one of, it's quite similar to the second one. I'll let you taste it. In fairness, it's changed a bit in the glass. It's a bit mousy now. So here we are in Chile. We're in País. So País is the grape variety in 2020. We're in Maule, in Cauquenes. So this is completely sulfite-free vinification from grapes that are 150 years old, ungrafted vines on volcanic soil and decomposed granite. So really beautiful old vines and very light pigeage, and then aged in oak before release 2020. This is sort of, one of the last vintages of this particular project.
So Isabelle, you and I have had this discussion before. You've seen mouse go away. Now, essentially, there is some mousiness in this. If I had one bottle of this, I'd be thinking, well, is the next bottle going to be the same? Why would it not be the same? And are you saying to me, well, actually put that wine away for X time and then come back to it, and that mouse will have reduced? Is that...
very often I've had that experience. I have to say, the last time I tasted this wine was 12 months ago. And I picked this wine for my wine club. I used to have a wine club in the US. And when I buy wine for the wine club, I typically taste everything, and then I leave everything open, and I taste it the next day, and I do that over a week. And this wine showed no sign of mousiness, which is, why I picked it in this occasion. So I think now I couldn't, for this wine, I probably would say to you, I don't think so. I think it's,
It is what it is.
It is what it is, yeah.
Now,
and it's a shame because when you first open it, it's like, there is this VA, and it's over the one, I think it's 1.4 grams, but the wine is really intense, smoky, it's got beautiful aromatics, and the VA works with this wine. But so for me it's mousy for sure.
We've had two of the faults that are associated sometimes with natural wines. One is obviously VA, the other is mouse. I guess we can talk about things like Brett and Brettanomyces. And I had this conversation with Alice Firing, the other queen of the natural wine world. And her feeling was we focus far too much on faults. We should actually look at the wine in the round. And she said to me, look at that woman who's got a scar on her face. The scar makes her face more beautiful. And I said, actually, if we ask the woman, I'm not sure she wants the scar on her face. But I'm interested to know how you, after now 20 years more, I think, of how do you see faults in the context, well, quote-unquote faults in the context of natural wine?
I think a fault is a fault. I'm not going to stand here and say to you there's no mousiness here. If I was in a restaurant and I got this, I'd be disappointed, for sure, and I would say something. I think, for me, mousiness is probably
As you said, if you find sometimes wine like this in the wine bar, you said you will be disappointed. A lot of time happen this. And the answer from the wine owner is because it's natural.
Yeah, I think
the normal is change me with other things. But for them, because it's natural, is the answer correct.
Yeah, I think that's wrong. I mean, we're in the service industry and you come to enjoy a bottle of wine. They should have done their job and picked a wine that was, for me, clean, for sure.
Just one thing. What about the service temperature of this kind of wine?
So, I asked for the red to be served at 15, 16, because, this is 15% alcohol. So, the alcohol is there. Otherwise, I mean, for me, like something like 10, 11 degrees on these wines is 10, 12 degrees. Yeah, or even warmer. Yes, but then I wasn't sure, of the temperature of the room, but even warmer. But I think 10, 12 is a good temperature for white or bubbles in general. But I don't like the whites to be too cold.
So Isabelle and I think we're going to be in one of the rooms to do a session afterwards, but you won't all get into that room, and A, and B, you've got the wines in front of you. This is your opportunity to ask Isabelle a question that you might not get a chance to do afterwards, certainly not with the wine.
No, but I just wanted to finish the conversation, sorry, Robert, on the last one and on mousiness, because, no one wants to make mousy wine. I think the issue often is that, which is not the case in this, because actually it was released, I think the case in this is probably, high pH and the alcohol, but no one wants to make a wine with mouse. Often, though, there is the pressure of the market where the wine has to be released because you have a cash flow issue and in your winery, and then the wine is sort of ready, and then the market is asking for your wine and you need the money. And for me, I prefer to see a bit of sulfites on the wine. If you are going to be releasing it, maybe, within a year, maybe use sulfites during the winemaking process, or at least you have a wine which is stable, because I think that's our responsibility, is to serve wine which is ready. Or wait, like in the case of the Witowska, they wait 3 years until they feel that the wine is ready. So I think, it's important that we don't, like in your experience, for me, that's wrong. I think call a cat, otherwise, how are we kidding? And we have to progress. But I think in fairness, it's, in my experience, from what I taste, and I taste a lot of wine every day, it's less and less that I see an issue of mouse. VA for me, in these two wines, I'm very happy with it. I wish it was maybe on the slightly lower side, but I think with food, and I think there's a context in which those wines would shine. Bread, I think to some extent, but bread is not exclusively an issue with natural wine. You go to Bordeaux or the Rhone.
It's about if we're not using sulfur and we're not filtering, the danger potentially of a Brett getting worse in that bottle is more significant.
Maybe, but Brett is always present everywhere. So, you're in the vineyard. If you actually grab a sample of the population, you'll see Brett, in the vineyard. It's how you handle that as it comes in. But I think Brett, to some extent, if it's just a little bit, can also be part of the terroir story. The same as yeast can be part of terroir of a wine.
I'll tell you what, Andrea.
I'm just very curious how many people in the audience cannot taste the mousiness, because it's estimated about 40% of the population is genetically not able to taste that. So it's
a good question,
it's really interesting to have a large group of people to see. We trained ourselves to taste it because we recognize that blindness in our kind of tasting ability, but...
It's a quick show of hands. How many people in the room have identified that character we call mousiness in the red wine? So, Andrea, you're making a very good point. It's not half the room. How many people in the room are finding something in this wine,
which is not the volatile acidity,
that they're not feeling, apart from the volatile acidity, that they're not happy with? There's a character in the wine.
And something you don't smell, but only taste. You don't feel it on the nose, but only on the palate.
Se il mouse in inglese sarebbe bucce di suri in francese o bucce di salame, c'è quella la buccia di, sì. Okay.
I think last time, hands for people who found something that they didn't like, or mouse, or opportunity. It's still not really, it is 60%. It's not the whole room.
Yeah.
So I think,
I mean, did anybody actually enjoy the last wine? Okay.
But I think we also need to make that point that not everybody spots Brettanomyces in the same way. Not everybody spots TCA in the same way. We are, I think...
Yes, I mean, I think, look, the point, if I can just, we're going to wrap up, I mean, and it'd be great to take more questions. I think the point is, I'm not here to convince you that natural wine is what you should be drinking. There is a big market out there of people who are drinking natural wine and who do not need convincing. I think the takeaway for me from what the amazing work that the producers are doing, even if there might be a little bit of a microbiological problem in this particular wine. We have a duty of working in the long term. You know, we are in an industry where even if you just look at the farming aspect, let alone, you know, what happens in the cellar. But, you know, for me, what's really important is that we are respectful of the environment. You know, we're ethical. We try and work by reducing, obviously, carbon footprint. We work on carbon sequestration. And that has a public. You know, when we talk about people not being able to sell wine anymore, that the industry is basically in difficulty and so on, you know, some people are still drinking wine, and the young people are drinking natural wine because it, you know, they like the ethics. They like that it's a small business. You know, there's transparency. We're not trying to hide, you know, anything. And I think that's actually really valuable.
I think it's also, I will say, certainly in France, and this is the last, I have seen more people, a lot of people are drinking wine in France where wine consumption has fallen off a cliff. I've seen young people who have got into wine, who are into wine via natural wine, who might not be drinking wine at all. So I think it's actually been a positive for those people.
Let me just give you very quickly what the wines are.
Yep.
So we have, the first one was Gutogau in Burgenland 2023, Theodora. Number 2 is Chotar, the Vitovska 2020 from Slovenia. And the last one is Mission El Pisador in Chile, which is the project from Elena Pantaleoni in the Maule in Cauquenes, vintage 2020.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, Chin Chin.